Okay, so I want to start this video off with a story. So a while back I was in a cafe editing one of my videos and having a cup of coffee. But I couldn't help to overhear the conversation at the table next to mine. They were a group of young American friends who apparently were on a long trip around Europe. And at one point the conversation was focused around the stark differences they saw between major European cities that they visited to their hometowns back in the States. Now, I've never been to America.
Good morning, my neighbors!
But anyway, as I sat there overhearing them, it made me wonder, what makes European cities and American cities so different and, as we're gonna pretty soon discover, pretty cool in their own iconic way. I'm Thomas, welcome to another episode of Tech Dynamics, and today we're discovering the differences between European and American cities. Stay tuned. So at first glance it seems to be pretty simple. European city centers are far older and the populations of these countries did not increase as rapidly as the US, especially in the post-war era. It also is, even till this day, far more difficult to obtain a new construction permit in a lot of countries in Western Europe than the US, especially in historic centers. This was more evident after the Second World War. Large portions of Europe were decimated and reduced to rubble by 6 years of raging warfare. Let's take Germany as a typical example. So after the war, West Germany experienced considerable economic growth and in-migration. Keep in mind that Germany's population grew slower than America's after the second half of the 20th century. For example, Chicago's population rose by only 4% from 1970 to 1990. However, its built-up land area grew by 46% in that same period. Want to hear something crazier? So, metropolitan Cleveland, for example, its population actually declined by 8% in that same period, but its built-up area actually increased by a staggering 33%. This incredible urban sprawl of American communities could be attributed to a number of factors. The characteristic trends of American cities, such as wide streets, car dependence, and single-use zoning. However, these are simply overshadowed by one factor in particular: suburbs. Now, I could literally dedicate an entire video about the development of American suburbs, but let's keep it short and sweet. So during the late 40s and 50s, the cost of buying a house dropped significantly, meaning that even working class Americans could afford to own a decent home. This presented a business opportunity for Levitt and Sons, which were a leading American construction company at the time. They acquired 4,000 acres of potato fields in Long Island. Levitt embarked on a plan to transform the land into the largest private housing project in American history. The sheer mass production of houses led to a community of 82,000 people in less than a decade. This was the first of many new suburban settlements that sprung up all across the US. For example, Jacksonville went from being a town of 30 square miles to a region of 841 square miles. The new suburbs led to the distribution of modest populations into larger territories, contributing to the low population density that we discussed earlier. On the other hand, many European cities date back centuries of influence and urban development. Thus, cities like Barcelona, Rome, and London were built long before modern city planning practices were even established, with distinctive characteristics like alleys, integrated neighborhoods, and densely packed urban areas. A typical example of this is actually Zurich, where 99% of residents live within a 15-minute walk of essential services such as healthcare and education. Services which aren't reachable by walk could easily be reached by public transport. Compare that to San Antonio in Texas, where just 2.5% have this luxury. Well, we Europeans call this a luxury, so. A recent study has highlighted that a large majority of cities in Western Europe are or close to being 15-minute cities. And before you ask, yes, it is an actual term. It basically means that residents are within 15 minutes of walking distance from all services such as supermarkets, schools, hospitals, and parks. At the bottom end of the spectrum of cities that were discussed in the study were sprawling American cities like San Diego, Dallas, and Atlanta. However, outside of city centers, it's a different story in Europe. You see, rural towns and less densely populated areas struggle to access reliable public transport, so there's still a high dependency on cars in these areas. In the US, car culture remains the dominant choice for most. Extensive highways and a lack of sufficient public transport systems have made cars the only viable option for most. Obviously, we have to consider the long distances that Americans have to travel on a daily basis compared to most Europeans. As I said in the beginning, suburban culture away from city centers, which is where a lot of the businesses are actually situated, contributes to this high dependency on cars. A car also provides a sense of freedom and flexibility. However, there are some downsides to this. Cities are often characterized by wide roads, massive parking lots, and congestion. We can go on and on about the different characteristics of European and American cities. Both have their strengths and weaknesses depending on your personal preference. I personally haven't made up my mind yet, but what do you think? Would you consider moving to the other side of the Atlantic? Let me know in the comments below. By the way, before signing off, I just want to say thank you to all of you watching and who have subscribed. It's a massive commitment to do this consistently, so I just wanted to say thank you for the support. Now, I've made an entire video about a linear city being built in Saudi Arabia. I highly recommend you watch it after this, and I'll see you there.